Looks really different outside than it did just a week ago. If you don't like green, you're in trouble this time of year. There's plenty of green out now. Reading something about creation and thinking about, most people appreciate trees even if they don't know what kind they are or how to name them. And throughout the universe, every galaxy, every solar system that we can trace as far as the best telescopes can take us, this person was mentioning that there's precious metals everywhere. Even in our own planet, they say if you go deep enough into the Earth's core, there's enough gold to make it knee-deep around the entire surface of the world. Platinum, diamonds are just like space dust floating everywhere by the truckload, by the megaton. But as far as we know, and as much as we can tell through as much space exploration as we've done, we're the only planet that has trees. And so if we were in intergalactic trade with other people, a wooden toothpick, would be worth more than truckloads of diamonds in terms of the scarcity and what we have in the universe. So I just thought that was interesting. And so if you get a 2x4 from me for Christmas, now you'll know why. Because that's worth truckloads of gold and diamonds. And so in terms of trees, I mention that because we've been going through these challenging sayings of Mark. As we went through Mark Live, there were some strange sayings, and this is a healing miracle, the only healing miracle, I believe, that exists only in Mark and not in another gospel, and that's why it stands out a little strange. And so one of the things, though, that we need to keep in mind is that as Jesus goes through his ministry, there's all kinds of healings, and there's miracles, and there's arguments, but there's always more to the story. There's always a reason that he's doing it. We know that there are some times where it says Jesus went to a village and just healed people all day long. We don't have itemized healings every time. It's just that he healed and he healed. And he drove out many demons at this place, and it doesn't give us details. But whenever it does give us detail and it lays out a specific healing or exorcism or saying, it's like, oh, he's demonstrating something. And so this first blank here is like every sermon, every argument, every question, every action, every miracle, every encounter, Jesus is revealing his identity, his authority, and his kingdom. We find out pretty quick that Jesus has power and that he can do whatever he wants to do. But the reason that we get stories that we get is because it's revealing something about his identity, his authority, and his kingdom. For instance, one of the more interesting miracles in Mark, and you'll find it also in Matthew, is whenever the 4 people bring their paralyzed friend and they can't get through because of the crowd, and so what do? They tear the roof off the house. That's bizarre, and the guy gets healed. But after the story, it tells us that this was done so you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. Yeah, the guy was able to walk again. Wonderful for him, it demonstrates it, but that miracle was so that we would know that he has authority to forgive sins. That's the big deal. And on throughout, we get to the most famous miracle, the feeding of the 4,000 or 5,000. I say it's most famous. It's the only miracle that occurs in all 4 Gospels, besides the resurrection. And we think, well, people are getting a lunch they didn't have to pay for. Well, that's happened to you before, right? Someone else has picked up the tab for you, or you showed up somewhere and someone gave you a lunch and you didn't have to pay for it. Maybe nothing miraculous took place and these people got a lunch, and that was nice for them to get that. But after the miracle, the disciples pick up all these baskets of leftovers. There's 12 baskets of leftovers. The disciples didn't think Jesus would do anything, but he does a miracle, and there just happens to be 12 baskets of leftovers that they carry back. One for each disciple. Each disciple gets to carry his own basket of leftovers back to Jesus, demonstrating that he went above and beyond even what the need was and brought back all these leftovers. He does the miracle again sometime later with 4,000, and there's 7 baskets of leftovers. And it's like, why would you tell us how many leftovers there were? No time when you've had a great meal do you talk about really what was left over. Maybe the next day or so, you're like, hey, do we have any of that left over? That was really good. But that's not part of your presentation of what's left over. But Jesus and Mark and Matthew, who write this miracle, they make a big deal about the leftovers. And the point is not just that these people got a free lunch, but that in God's kingdom, he provides more than you need. He's more than sufficient for the needs that you have. That's kind of the spiritual lesson out of this miracle. And he's done that miracle now. Again, maybe he did this regularly. Maybe he fed people miraculously on multiple accounts. We have these too. But that's what's important to keep in mind as we see what's getting ready to take place here in this story of Mark. And so we'll go ahead and go through this passage. I've actually jumped up a little bit to give context. Again, the Gospels are not written chronologically like we tell a story. They're written thematically, and so there's a theme that's dealt with throughout. So here's where the theme starts. Leaving them, he went back to the other side. This was some Pharisees that wanted to argue with him, so he left there, and now he goes back to the other side, home base for them. And they forgot to take bread. This is right after he had done the miracle the second time, and they had all these leftovers. But the disciples, they were either so tired or excited or maybe forgetful, they left all the leftovers on the shore when they got in the boat, and now they're headed back. Long journey across the Sea of Galilee. It says they forgot to take bread, except one loaf they had in a boat. He was teaching them, saying, watch out, be careful of the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod. And they were discussing this, saying, it was because they have no bread. Knowing this, Jesus says, why are you discussing having no bread? You still don't perceive or understand? Go one more. I have them out of order. No, I must have missed that. Let me just read it here. I must have those out of order. It said, why are you discussing having no bread? Do you still not perceive or understand? Are your hearts hard? Do you have eyes but can't see, and ears but can't hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets of leftovers did you pick up? 12, they said. And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many baskets of leftovers did you pick up? And they said 7. He was saying to them, you still don't understand. And so we'll stop there before we get to the rest of the passage. Jesus told them, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod. The Pharisees represent all the religious class that is coming against them. Herod is the political class that's coming against them. And the yeast, as he's taught previously, is, you know how yeast works in bread, since they're talking about bread. Just, you've heard the saying, a little yeast works through the whole batch, a saying. And it just takes a little bit of yeast, if you've ever made bread, to make this bread rise and become large. And yeast is also symbolic of sin in the Bible. So we had a Passover meal a few weeks ago, and one of the things you would do is you'd get all the yeast out of your house. It's symbolically of sin. Not just a one-time sin, but sin that kind of spreads. Today we would call it addiction. That if you have an addiction, it's not just that you mess up once, but it's that something keeps at you and sort of takes over your life and traps your soul in a way. So that's the problem. He said, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Herod. Also, the disciples are getting somewhat famous now. There's throngs of people following them, especially now that they're getting free lunch everywhere they go. And so be careful that you don't get cocky and that power doesn't go to your head and the influence you have doesn't shape your soul in a bad way. Because if you're on my entourage, you're going to be seen as superstars, because Jesus certainly was a superstar in the way we would, in terms of how famous he is. And, the Pharisees, they love to be the superstars. That's why they're there. That's what they're doing. Herod has all this authority, and he likes to lord it over and be king over everyone. That don't let that kind of stuff go to your head. Stay humble. That's his perennial message to his followers. Stay humble. Make sure you're serving one another. Don't try to argue over who's the greatest, which they're getting ready to do. And he keeps hitting them on stay humble. So beware. Don't let the way the Pharisees operate and Herod operate influence the way you understand your own leadership. So there's a lot of, wonderful leaders in churches. In this church, there's good leadership, and it's like we're always asking ourselves, we don't want to lead Safe Harbor in the way the bank manager leads the bank. That's a different thing. We have a different scorecard. We're trying to make disciples and serve our community. We're not trying to make a big profit and have a certain type of influence that would take away the message of the gospel. It's a different kind of leadership, and that's what he's trying to fix in the minds of his followers. But they mistake his talking about yeast for literal bread. This is typical. When people misunderstand the words of Jesus, they typically take something he's saying parabolically, metaphorically, symbolically, and they take it literally, and they mess it up. When he tried to teach communion, they did that. Just over and over again, people take his words literally when he's speaking figuratively, and this is one of those examples. So he's not happy with them. He's like, they should know this. Do you have ears but cannot hear? Do you have eyes but cannot see? Are your hearts hard? And don't you remember? Why would you be talking about scarcity with me? When you're in the boat with me, why would you talk about not having enough for life? Is his message to them. And so he goes over. You have a testimony with me. You have a history with me in that I have multiplied and I have taken care of everything you've needed every step along the way. Your job is to have faith. And as long as you have faith, it will be provided. Isn't that what we've been doing now for some time? And he even gets an answer. A lot of times Jesus asks these questions and they're afraid to answer. But here, he's going over basic math with them. Now, how many leftovers? 12. How many baskets of leftovers? 7. They have to recite the actual blessing that they've received in order to remind them that there is no scarcity with him, that he has provided. And he's not talking about physical bread. So that's been the challenge that Jesus has with his disciples, and it's helpful for us that he picked very forgetful, hard-headed disciples, meaning that no one is unable to be a disciple. It just takes us a long time. We need things repeated. Right? If you're a teacher or a parent, you've had to repeat things that you think should be simple. And even in your job, whatever you do, like there's things that and if you work in healthcare or whatever you work in, it's like you have to tell people over and over again. We're barraged with information, and our brain has to differentiate and decide what is priority and act upon it. And that's what he's trying to do with his disciples. And it's in light of that we have the rest of this strange, I call it odd, healing. So on the back of your bulletin, it's that second paragraph. They came to Bethsaida, and they bring a blind man to him and beg him to touch him. Taking hold of the blind man's hand, he led him out of the village and spit on his eyes, and laying his hands on him, asked, "Do you see anything?" Looking up, he says, "I see men, but they look like trees walking around." He touched his eyes a second time, and he opened and saw everything clearly. And he sent him home, saying, "Don't go into the village or tell anyone." So that's an odd one. That's not the miracle that you see in the children's books very often. If you did, that's a fascinating picture of what the man might have seen, and we don't know. But it is interesting. You read this, and it's like this one didn't make the normal teaching circuit. It's only in Mark. It's the only miracle that I think is only in Mark and not in another gospel. So it kind of gets hidden. It's a challenging one. And so there's a few possibilities going on. One could be, some people would hold this position, is Jesus was just below par this day. He's in Bethsaida. Maybe there was some satanic kryptonite there. He just couldn't muster up what needed to be mustered up to do this miracle all the way through, and he had to do it in phases. That there's something deficient in Jesus. Maybe he didn't say the right thing or didn't have the right attitude. We don't know. I mean, there's all kinds of things you could come up with why this doesn't work. It comes on the heels of, he's been raising people from the dead by now. It seems like a simple restoring sight wouldn't be that big of a deal. Right? He's raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. He's driving out demons left and right. There's some towns where he'll go and it says, from dusk till dawn, people are healing him. He healed the woman who had the issue of blood by accident. She touched him from behind. He didn't even know what happened, and he healed her. And that kind of thing happens over and over again. The previous miracle is the one we talked about last week, where a woman came to him and said, "My daughter is possessed by an evil spirit," and Jesus heals her from a distance. She's like the next town over, and Jesus does an exorcism from a distance. He's healed the centurion's servant from a distance, not even there. And here he's got this guy one-on-one, lays his hands on him, and asks him, "Do you see anything?" And the man, we don't know, was he blind from birth? What does he even know what a tree looks like? But either way, he said, "I see people, and they look like trees." He's just not, it's not clear yet. I believe, again, this particular healing is placed here right underneath this message about the yeast and the loaves and the hardness of heart. And Jesus showing his followers something over and over again, and they still can't see it. They still don't get it. And so the second line here, I believe this healing is a living parable for his followers, reminding to see you must have kingdom eyes of faith. Again, all the parables that Jesus teaches, like last week, he gave a parable to the woman, and the woman entered into that parable and repeated it back to him as one of the people in the parable, and it was like, she got it. She got it. He's always speaking in these metaphors and these parables. They get it. So it's, I don't think Mark is looking for a time when Jesus was subpar. I don't think Jesus ever was subpar. His Father gave him the authority to do things 100% and completely. He wasn't like a cheap magician doing a trick. Instead, he had all the power in the universe at his disposal, and healing this man the first time would have been no problem for him. But just like the banter he has with the woman last week, that brings his disciples into the conversation to see that he is sent not just to the Jews, but also to the Gentiles, to the whole world. That was the message of last week. Now he's demonstrating this healing for them to see that, Jesus is constantly, his grace is constantly made available in our lives. His power is not insufficient, but our response can be unfaithful. And I believe that this is a visual aid, pardon the pun, but it's like a visual aid for not being able to see with the eyes of faith. These disciples had been with Jesus now some time. They had seen his power over and over again, complete and total and absolute. And they have to be wondering, what's wrong with that guy? Why can't he see? Jesus obviously had the power to heal him. What's wrong with this guy? Why doesn't he get it? Why can't he see clearly? That's what the apostles would have been thinking. Like they know that Jesus is sufficient. They know that his power and his healing is absolutely perfected at every instance. So why can't this guy see? What's wrong with this guy? And just like Nathan telling David in the Old Testament of story when David stole Uriah's wife, and the prophet came to him and told him a story about a man who had millions of sheep and then went to a poor farmer and stole the only sheep he had. And Nathan finally then told David, you're the man. You're the one who did wickedness in this story. And he came around. Oh, yeah, he's talking about me. And I believe as they see this miracle that takes, that second chance, it's the disciples are looking at it, and they was like, oh, yeah, what he just said in the boat 10 minutes ago. That's what this is about, that we don't have the spiritual vision. There's nothing wrong with the power of God. The power of God's all around us. It's available, but we haven't had the faith to be able to receive it. So I believe that's, again, what's going on here. And so there's two truths here. As we kind of, what's the big picture of everything going on? There's the truth of what God offers, and God has been, Jesus has been teaching his truth and his kingdom and our place in it as we come to it and submit to his will. And we have to know that. We have to know that in our minds. And I believe the disciples knew that. They got there were leftovers. It wasn't a disciple that forgot that there were leftovers. They got it. They knew the truth, but the truth wasn't in the way they were seeing the world yet. And it's a danger for people who are in the church or grow up in the church or believe the right things, is that you can have the right answer but still not be living it out in the right way. So this next line here, there is a truth that we believe, and we have good theology. But then there's a testimony we live so that truth is expressed in an overcoming life. So we have to have the right truth. We have to believe what is accurate about God. And we believe here that Jesus had complete power and intention to heal completely. We believe that Jesus makes promises of our forgiveness based upon what he does on the cross. We believe that he has gifted us with his Spirit and spiritual gifts that we exercise with the body of Christ. We believe that his grace never runs out. We sing all these songs every week, and if you really look at the lyrics of the songs that we sing, it's like there's a lot of promises in those songs, a lot of truth in those songs. And step one is, do you believe? Do you believe in that truth? Do you believe God is who he says he is according to his word? And then do we have the testimony to back it up? So you can have truth, but no testimony. And if you do that, it's just kind of an academic exercise. It's just someone you've got the right answers. And it doesn't mean anything. Now, maybe you just got the truth and you're a brand new follower and you're like, I don't have a testimony yet. That's okay. You're brand new at this. You believe the truth and testimony will follow. And if you have a testimony with no truth, you might have a fascinating story, but it'll always come back to you. It'll always be about your personality and what you've achieved and how good or how lucky you are. So the truth, Jesus offers everything. We have faith. And in our faith becomes that then testimony that we live out. So this last line here, it takes all of our spiritual prayer, the word, mentoring, worship service, etc., to develop and maintain spiritual vision. So this miracle here that is done, it looked like in stages, is about spiritual vision. So, why do you go to church on a Sunday morning? Well, maybe because you didn't have a choice this morning, depending upon how your house works. Maybe it was a sense of guilt. Perhaps it was, maybe you're just in a routine. That's what I've done my whole life. It's just like, death and taxes. It's church on Sunday morning. That's just what we do. We're glad you're here, regardless of that particular reason, but it's a lot bigger than that. Why would you read the Bible? It's interesting literature. It's fascinating stories. It's enlightening spiritual content. That's true. Why would you have fellowship with someone else? Why would you sing? Why would you attempt to persevere with truth? Like, so we can have this sense of spiritual vision. And so there's that kind of religion that is a checkmark religion that says, well, these are the items, the list of things that I need to do to make myself feel spiritual. Thus, maybe that is feeling better than the person that lives next to me, or the person who's, out sinning so much on Saturday night that can't make it on Sunday morning. Maybe that's that feeling you're going for. Well, that would be the wrong reason. So all the spiritual disciplines that we encounter together, the big reason behind why would you serve? Why would you sign up to work in the nursery? Maybe you could be guilted into it. Maybe that's why. But why would you serve? Why would you sacrifice? Why would you give? Why would you do all the things that you do, knowing that the immediate reward might not be palpable in your life? And I love this little miracle, this odd little miracle, because it reminds me that, Jesus is always reaching out. He's always offering a healing touch. He's always persevering in our life, even though we never see on the first time. Like, hopefully you have a testimony where you look back and you're like, wow, I have a spiritual vision that's bigger than it was last year. You don't need to become spiritual Superman or Superwoman next week, but as your life progresses in your faith, hopefully you look back and you see my motivations for doing what I do has a more servant-oriented motivation, reasoning behind it. I don't just have to do this. I want to do this. Not just because it makes me feel good, but because I understand what God is doing in His kingdom, and I want to be part of that. I don't want to be left out of what God really has for me and for the person sitting in front of you and behind you and beside you and the people in your circle of influence. That all the people in my circle of influence will be brought closer to God's kingdom because I have spiritually put myself in an environment to be visionary, sharp, and focused. And I'll have faith, hopefully, going forward more the first time that God offers His grace, and I'll see it. And instead of seeing something, you come into church and it's like, what are all these trees walking around? Or what's all this craziness going on in the world? Who's in control of this? Who made all this stuff happen? You have a spiritual vision that says, the world is broken from the beginning, and God sent His Son to this world to save His creation. And He's offered Himself for that. He's offered His own life so that this place that we live, covered in people and trees and everything else, will eventually be redeemed, and that He will buy it all back. And in the meantime, we live in this struggling, evil world as believers who witness to the truth of what He promises, living out this testimony that He's given us to live by faith. And so, as we have our final song here, we'll have a time of invitation. And I would love you to pray for a clear spiritual vision of what is God really showing me. He's touched my life many times. He's reaching out, and a lot of times some days we have a spiritual blindness. We don't see it. We've missed it. But he keeps reaching out again and again and again. And hopefully, like the disciples, and this man who was healed of his blindness will start to see, then he sees everything clearly. And that we would see everything clearly, to be able to amid all the sin and darkness and that which comes against us, the yeast of the Pharisees, the yeast of Herod, all that comes against us, that we can see spiritually through the morass of sin and death and corruption and decay, and to have faith. Have faith that God, His power, His intention, His grace, His touch will continue, and it will continue. And one day, whether He returns or takes you home, that your spiritual vision will be utterly complete, and you will see Him face to face, just as He intended in His creation. And then you will forget all those trees walking around. You won't remember the suffering and the pain and the what could have been. But you have to live that vision now. Start living that spiritual vision now. Refuse to believe the lies that the world offers you, and see the spiritual vision in front of you. He keeps touching. Do you see? Do you see? Just open your eyes. Let's pray. Lord, we pray that we need many touches over and over again, that your splendor is complete, your power is absolute, and your healing is total, but there are things that we refuse to see. We are deceived at times. We are distracted at times. And we just choose other things. But we pray this morning, individually, in our families, and as a church, to have this spiritual vision, to be able to see you clearly. And if we keep our focus and our eyes on you, we will know how to walk. You will give us that testimony that is known of your disciples. So we thank you for that promise and that offer, that we would live that truth out in a testimony together. in this dark world, reminded that it all belongs to you, including us. So just give us that vision to see. In your name.